So this is the writer's bridge, because a platform is a thing you stand up and yell at people from, and a bridge is a two-way street where you reach out to your readers and your readers reach back to you. We will cover a lot. We always cover a lot. Hashtag firehose me. So we do recommend that even if you're here live, hi guys, we're so glad you're here, that you please go ahead and watch the video as well. Maybe play it while you're doing the dishes or vacuuming or whatever it is that you do that occupies your hands and not your brain. We have a really special guest, but before we introduce Catherine, we have a question of the week. Laura asks, is it possible to take an Instagram highlight that has a series of stories in it and turn that into a video that I can use on another platform? And yes, in fact, there is, and I'm going to show you exactly how that happens. So what's really useful about this is you can add stuff from your Instagram into your highlights, which are these circles up here. And that lets you make a little story that people can watch and talk about all the time. So I did a presentation and I put the slides up here. I did a retreat in Tuscany and I put some of the best pictures up there, that kind of thing. Now, this is a screen recording I made earlier today. If you wanted some of those highlights to become a video, you're going to end up downloading them to your phone. So what you'll do is first you'll go to your profile and select one of the highlights. Then you're going to make a little swipe up and you're going to look for that little round circle at the very top there, which is save the entire story as one video. Then that video is going to download into your photos, and you will then be able to open up the photo and it will play as it played on your Instagram story. And honestly, I might try this at some point to cobble together videos by uploading them first to Instagram and then downloading them as a highlight, because I am not super fantastic at editing videos myself. Ashley, you want to add anything to that? Any good tips?
I love that so much. On a day-to-day basis, if you have an Instagram story that you think is a real winner, or you would otherwise like to memorialize or categorize on your phone, tap the ... and then you can click save video or save story. Now, if it was a still image, the two options you're going to get are save photo or save story. You could save the whole story as one video, or you can save just a slide at a time. Now, here is the second part of that tip. Then put it in an album on your phone called Save Stories, okay? Because you don't want to have to swipe through 3,000 or 12,000 photos to find that one 15-second clip that was a little bit funny that day. It's not going to seem as funny when you wasted your time searching for it. So categorizing on your native camera roll photos app on your phone can save you a lot of time moving forward.
And Stephanie adds, whenever she makes a story, she uses the download function to download it to her phone before she adds captions in case she wants to turn it into something else. Julie, yes, the class will be recorded. Stick around at the end if you want me to explain more about that. Samantha, it's capped at 40 people. So we have a super special guest with us tonight. Catherine Reynolds Lewis is the co-founder of the Center for Independent Journalists. She is herself an award-winning journalist and the author of the book, The Good News About Bad Behavior: Why Kids Are Less Disciplined Than Ever and What to Do About It. And that book started as an article in Mother Jones. It went viral. It landed her a big deal literary agent, and it landed her a book deal. Catherine's work has also appeared in The Atlantic, The New York Times, Parents, Slate, Washington Post, and Working Mother. She has a prestigious O'Brien Public Service Journalism Fellowship and also a Northwestern Medill Garage Media Entrepreneur Fellow this year. She's a Harvard physics graduate. I mean, this is like total Renaissance woman here, and has previously worked as a national correspondent for Newhouse and Bloomberg News, and covers everything from work-life balance and psychology to the White House. Welcome, Catherine. We are so glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Allison and Ashley. I'm really excited to be here with all of you, and I recognize some familiar names as a customer of this Writer's Bridge webinar in the past. So I'm glad to be speaking.
Catherine, what's the Center for Independent Journalism and why did you start it?
So the Center for Independent Journalists is a baby organization serving freelance journalists with a focus on freelancers of color and the most marginalized voices in media. And honestly, it really grew out of my own pandemic search for community, and my own sort of evolving racial identity. In March 2020, I had been on the road as a speaker about my book, The Good News About Bad Behavior, and sort of half of my income in 2019 was from speaking fees. So when the pandemic happened, all of a sudden, all my speaking engagements were canceled. I had no pipeline of work, and I'm an extrovert. So like I had to figure out other ways to connect with people. And I invited a few of friends of mine to join once a month in a conversation about our work, all journalists of color. And it just became the most meaningful source of connection and support for me, where everyone was just really vulnerable. And I've been a solo writer for 13 years, and I feel like I would have figured out all the tricks. And yet there were still things in those conversations that I'm like, oh, wait, I never did that. And someone else who had been freelancing for 15 years was like, wait, you do what? I'm like, yes, always read your contract, that sort of thing. And we just wanted to broaden it, because I don't think that these sort of tricks of the trade should be hidden behind, in small groups or closed doors. And really, the more people who know and have the power to make their work get past those gatekeepers, the more diversity we're going to have in the media environment. And especially right now, the pandemic showed us that the people most likely to be freelancing are people of color, women, people with disabilities, people who aren't necessarily going to be full-time in a newsroom. And those are also people who are potentially the most financially unstable and less able to do it. So we really want to bring sort of business startup tools to as many people as possible. And we're starting with a webinar on December 3rd that's free. I hope everyone will attend, on pitching, how to pitch. We have editors from the New York Times, Noah Michelson from the Huffington Post Personal, who I know everyone loves, and Politico Magazine and NBC Black. So, and then we're doing an annual conference in March, and just really excited to, share some of the things that we know and learn more from, everyone who comes to speak.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Catherine, so I came from figure skating into writing. And the first thing I noticed that felt so odd here was that the people with the most talent had the least amount of agency, or seemed to have the least amount of agency. I am so grateful that we've brought together this community here, as far as like really getting to the nitty gritty about what platform building is and isn't, because that, oh, you need platform is just such an easy way to like stonewall conversation, right? Or to not give any other reasons for a querying author to just feel like there's nothing they can do in that moment to really change things. With you bringing people together, what are the biggest things that you have seen with bringing people together without any gatekeepers in the mix that has shifted perspective?
Oh, that's such a great question. I mean, I think it really is the most impactful thing for me has been, honestly, that we all have the same insecurities and, fears about our work. Writing, creating is such a vulnerable thing, and putting a piece of yourself out into the world is really, really hard. So the first meeting of this group that I mentioned, I mean, the people that I invited and then they invited their friends were like people who have won, Nieman fellowships at Harvard and Soros Justice fellowships. And, there's this $100,000 prize in journalism that's just given to someone for their body of work. And two people who had won that were in the room. So I'm like super intimidated. And in the first 10 minutes, one of those people who won this $100,000, I think Hyman Simmons Prize, said, I just feel really like I'm not such a good writer. I know I'm good on radio, but I just I worry about my writing skills, and my language isn't as good as it should be. And I'm like, all of us have these doubts. And when you can be in a space with people that you admire and who are supporting you, and realize that they also have those same fears, I think that is the most powerful thing, because it helps me on those days when I'm having the like, do I really have it in me to write another book? Or like, why am I even doing this? Should I just go get a job? I know that I'm not alone. So that sense of community and knowing that this work is hard. right? It feels hard, it feels lonely because it is hard. And so communities like the Writers Bridge community are so important for all of us to remember and support each other.
So Allison just commented that every single time she returns an edit to an author, she thinks that this is the time that the author is just going to demand their money back and go like, who are you? Who do you think you are editing? And I have the same thing every time I post a video. I can't believe anybody watches it. So Catherine, it was like writers lived in a very reactive space until pandemic, right? And then when we lose the control over our lives that we thought we had to like make new opportunities and connections. So you said like the first step to really seizing those opportunities, creating those opportunities for yourself, is to be prepared. What does that look like in your daily and weekly practice as a writer? And what do you advise for us?
Okay, do you have time for a long story?
We do.
Okay.
We love long stories.
So the good news about bad behavior started as a magazine article. But before there was a magazine article, there was a magazine pitch, right? And so way back, rewind to when I first started freelancing, I was laid off in 2008 and I had little kids and I didn't want to go back into an intense Washington D.C. newsroom job, at the bottom of the rungs, right, where I would be the first laid off. So I figured I'll give it a year. I had a severance package. I'll just try. And so I started just reaching out for resources. And the American Society of Journalists and Authors is one of those that's been very, very helpful to me over the course of my career. And I went to a conference and there was a session on book publishing. And I will never forget David Dobbs, who's a wonderful science writer. And he wrote a book, several books, but he was talking about how to sort of test your ideas out in the marketplace to give that sort of proof to editors and acquisitions editors and agents that your story has merit or your idea is going to have an audience. So it's sort of another way of looking at platform. And he said, just write an article, have it go viral, and then that's market proof, right? See, a
Just
piece
like
of cake. But I'm like, okay, well, obviously you can't control the viral part, but maybe if I keep an eye out for that big article, right, that is going to go viral, then I can try at least to get that piece of it. So I was from then on sort of looking for like, what is the story that's going to be an in-depth article where I really dig into a topic I care about and might want to write about. And I met Dr. Ross Green, who wrote a book called The Explosive Child about how to help the most oppositional, defiant, challenging kids. And he's doing amazing work stopping the school to prison pipeline in New England. Just, recidivism in the juvenile justice system in Maine has dropped 60% because of his model of working with kids. And, I interviewed wardens at this juvenile prison saying, like, they used to be wrestling with kids and now they aren't sore at the end of the day because they're just talking. It's this really, really powerful model. So I'm like, oh, okay, wow, this is impressing me. I'll just, write this up, write a pitch, try to get it published. And at the same time, write a book proposal, because that's what David Dobbs had said. It's like, if you have your story out there and it's going viral, right, then you also have the book proposal that your agent is submitting to editors, and that's this perfect, wonderful coincidence, and then everyone wants to bid on your
and Catherine, I just want to jump in a really quick second here, because one of the things that Ashley's mentioning is, rather than thinking let's go viral, we can think let's prove that there is a place for this in the market, that people are interested in this subject and compelled to engage with it. And I think that one of the things we can do to prepare, you mentioned the thing about the guards at the juvenile prison were saying, well, we aren't sore anymore because we're not wrestling physically with inmates to subdue bad behavior. And that's such a powerful image. It's in the Mother Jones article that you wrote. I'm assuming it's in your book as well. And that stuck with me, that this idea that these presumably grizzled, hardened juvenile detention guards had a visceral physical experience where they went from, oh, this is a bunch of hippy dippy bullcrap, to, okay, wait, I'm not physically exhausted when I go home anymore. And I think part of being prepared is noticing and practicing noticing what are those powerful, visceral, emotional moments that will stick in an audience's head. And I think that when we tweet stuff or we write stuff for Instagram or we talk about it on TikTok, and we talk about moments, not things, that's the kind of moments that we're looking for. The thing is a new technique fixed a juvenile prison's behavior problem. The moment is the guard is no longer tired from wrestling with the inmate. Back to you, Catherine.
Yes, I love that, Allison. So I went to Maine. I wrote up a pitch. I wrote a 900-word pitch. I pitched it to several magazines, and then the Mother Jones agreed to run it. And so I was thrilled. I'm sort of working on the magazine article with the editors at Mother Jones and pitching agents, which anyone who has done that here knows is like one of the circles of hell. So I'm pitching agents. I finally get someone who's interested. She asks to see my proposal. I send it to her, and she goes over it for a couple months, and her assistant sends back edits. And literally 2 weeks before my Mother Jones article runs, she says, no, this isn't going to work. I don't think this is a commercial project. So I'm like, oh no, my great plan, I was all prepared, is not going to work, but I can't control it at this point. But then the Mother Jones story ran, and it did go viral. And in the first couple of weeks, it had like 600,000 page views. So I wrote back to the agent. I'm like, hey, by the way, and she was still like, no, thanks. So at that point, I'm like, okay, I have a failed book proposal that is not marketable according to one very successful agent. But I had done all this work to write that proposal, right? I had done my comp titles. I had researched agents I wanted to send it to. I had, a dozen agents on that list of sort of dream agents. And my brother is in finance. He lives in New York. And he said to me, Catherine, you have a commodity, really, really valuable asset here. You have this article that is going viral. It's clearly struck a chord, right? The title they put on it was, "What if everything you knew about disciplining kids was wrong?" And it was resonating with people. He's like, here's what you do. You write a 3-paragraph email to your dream list of 12 agents. I am so-and-so. I wrote this article that's going viral. On the strength of that, I'm committed to pursuing this as my next book project, and I'm looking for representation. I'll be in New York next week and would love to meet with you. And I'm like, Chris, this is not how it's done in writing and book publishing. You write a letter, a query letter, then you wait 3 weeks and you talk to your friends and you stress eat ice cream. And then like, maybe you nudge. I'm like, you can't just be that aggressive. He's like, look, you have clearly got this market proof, right? And so he helped me write that 3-paragraph email. And by the time I got to agent 6 on my list, they all had said, yes, we want to meet with you. So I had to stop. I'm like, I don't have that much space in my brain for meetings with agents. So I met with literally my top 6 dream agents. They all wanted to represent me, and I picked the one that resonated with me the most. And it's because I think really having someone outside of this world, where I know everyone on this call is talented and committed to their craft. And so you're surrounded by people who are like that. And so you don't feel special. He was looking at me, he's like, no one I know knows how to write, how to create something from nothing, right? So they can't put out a book without you, which is so true. Like, they can't put out a magazine without us. And that just shifted my lens. So that was one really important moment. And then the other important moment was I worked with my agent, Richard Pine, at Inkwell Literary Management for probably 8 months, revising the proposal to make it marketable. He agreed it was not marketable. And then we started meeting with publishers and who were interested in the book. And again, Chris was so helpful, not just because I stayed with him for free in New York, but he helped me come up with talking points in those meetings with editors, and we practiced them, which is something I wouldn't have thought to do if I hadn't had someone who asks for millions of dollars from investors all the time. So he's like used to practicing his pitch. And that also was really, really helpful, because every acquisitions editor I met with had a slightly different take on the book and had different concerns about it. So they would ask certain questions that I was prepared for, but sometimes they didn't ask other questions. And then I had sort of my talking points. And that way I was sort of prepared for all the potential obstacles that they saw, but also with all of the selling points that maybe they didn't see. And that really helped me be much more effective in those meetings.
Side question, what was not marketable about your proposal, and how did you change it to get it to be marketable?
Yeah, so I had really written a book about like poor kids of color with disabilities. And they were like, yeah, that the people who, this is just a really sad reflection on where we are, right, in our world. But they're like, people who care about those kids don't buy $29.99 hardcover books, or they don't buy them in enough quantities that a major publisher is going to want to publish you. So, and it was 2015, right? It was a different era than now. I think hopefully that's changing now. But so it had been very much aimed at educators and people concerned about the school to prison pipeline. And we changed it to be about both educators and families and parents. So it is on the parenting shelf. This is the cover. So clearly like a parent situation of your kid throwing spaghetti at the wall, right? And I also included a lot of things in here from my own experience of parenting and sort of my journey. So it had a better narrative arc, but most importantly, I think it now can be shelved on the parenting shelf as opposed to education, which just isn't as
it's a much bigger audience. You went from a really particular niche audience and you were able to still attract that niche audience while greatly expanding the number of people your book would appeal to.
Right. And in fact, where I speak is at schools. So I think straddling both of those worlds, it has created this other career for me as a, educator and speaker.
I love this. I love this so much because what we always say is when an agent or an editor says, I don't know if this book is marketable, quite often they are saying, they're looking down the road at like, okay, the agent needs to sell it to the editor. The editor needs to sell it to the rest of the publishing team. The publishing team literally has boots on the ground trying to sell it to bookstores. So what they're asking is, what the hell shelf are we telling booksellers this is going on, right? Or what category is this going to fit into on Amazon for spring 2024 that I know people buy those kinds of books? So often when we're thinking marketability, think what damn shelf does it go on, right? And that doesn't mean, Catherine, you're becoming a parenting blogger, right? Not at all, because you just said that most of your speaking is to educators. It just means what slant are we going to take so that the people who open their wallets the most often are going to purchase this. And then guess what? We're going to have more money to donate copies of this book to underprivileged schools, right?
And you've proved there's a market. And so a year later, when the book comes out in paperback, now it only costs $14.99 instead of $25.99.
Right.
And maybe the cover is different in paperback too. Sorry, Catherine, right?
No.
So then we can like target to, right? Like who you really wanted this to be for. There, it is a business and it's a game. And I'm so glad that your financial expert brother was like, you've got the goods, sister. Just say, I've got the goods. Do you want them? Right?
Yeah.
In that email.
And I will say that, the preparation of spending years really in sessions like this, right? Thinking about how am I going to proceed in my career? What makes a book proposal? How can I be prepared for that opportunity? That was necessary, right? To be ready for that moment. And the other thing I would say is it really helped me, and this might be advice for all of you, is when people poo-poo it or like turn it down, it's very tempting to just go and lick your wounds. But if instead you can look at that rejection and say, okay, what grains of truth may there be in this feedback that I need to actually address? Because all of the concerns that people have about your platform or your marketability are going to come up at some stage in the process of publishing a book and promoting a book, whether it's the agent, the editor, the publicity person, the marketing person, the producer on the Today Show, the reviewer at the New York Times, right? They're all going to have these same questions. So the more you can answer them ahead of time and address the concerns and provide evidence that it's not a concern or a different way to look at it, the better your path will be laid for success.
So Catherine, Brooke asks in the chat, if an agent tells you, oh, I really like your query and your pages, but I have no idea how I'd market, should you just respond? And I mean, Ashley has pointed out, ideally you bake that into your query to begin with, but Catherine, what would you do if you had sent that out and you knew how to market it and the agent was like, oh, I love the book, but I don't know how I'd sell it. Would you respond?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an invitation to connect. And I will say, just make sure it's a really thorough response, not just like, oh, I have these connections, but like literally in my book proposal, I had a whole marketing section with names of people that I was going to ask to blurb it. and names of organizations that I'm connected to where I was going to be a speaker. So like as specific as you can get. And it's this very delicate dance between what you're learning about the marketplace and the realities of the marketplace and the perceptions of the people who run it, which are not necessarily the same thing, right? So sometimes people will say, oh, this will never sell, and they're wrong. But you have to create the path for them to believe that it's close enough to their vision that it will succeed. It's like this Venn diagram between what, the marketplace reality is, their perception of it, and your, where your idea, your project is going to fit. And I 100% believe that I knew my project better than anyone in that chain. I have been obsessively reading all the books about child discipline for years. So I knew all my comp titles. I knew all the different marketing strategies that other authors had used. So I was in a really good position to be authoritative, but I had to put it in language they understood and believed, and have that really granular evidence.
So Catherine was the expert on child discipline, right? Like the expert on what has been written and what has not been written on child discipline. Okay. When she knows that, just like I really felt like I knew my audience better than I could get an agent or publisher to know my audience. Like even if I spent 2 years schooling them on the things I learned, right? She just innately knew, okay, this is what people need to know, and this is how it can be told. I find that publishing is largely reactive. So I interviewed Candace Bushnell, and she said when Sex and the City came out, it was the same time as Bridget Jones's Diary. And publishers went, chicklet, we know what readers want now. We even made up a funny name for it. And then all of these chicklet books started coming on the market that weren't that good and didn't sell very well, right? Or it's like after Gone Girl came out, then it's like, oh, this is the kind of thing people want to read. Publishers are reactive. What has sold before? What was trending last year? So when you can become an expert on your audience or your topic, and you can say to an agent, I have, I get this kind of reaction when I publish here. These are my views. These are my page reads. This is my proof that my angle for delivering this information is received, and that the market is hungry for it. And we can really tell them, because it's all guessing, right? It's all guessing, and it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall, seeing what sticks. Sort of like your book cover, right, Catherine? What are some things that you've just been certain of, and how have you brought your publisher or your agent around to it? What are your methods?
Oh,
there?
That's a great story. That's a great question. Okay, I have another story. So I get the book deal. I pick an agent. We have multiple offers. I get the book deal. I work for a year on the book, and my pub date was April 2018. So I had heard all the advice, like start planning a year in advance. They weren't interested in planning a year in advance. So I'm like, okay, 6 months ahead, they definitely going to want to plan like this, 20 city book tour and like all the like Today Show appearances and all the things that I'm going to have for this book launch. Right. And so around September, I'm like, hey, agent, why haven't they called me for a publicity meeting? He's like, oh, okay, good idea. We should suggest one. So in early November, I went to New York City, and I was super excited about like going in and sort of seeing what they had planned for me. And I bought a new jacket and like had, my hair done, and walked into the room, and they were like, well, this is what we think. And we can probably send you to 2 book stops. Like we can send you to two different cities. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's not what I had in mind at all. And they're like, well, if you want to stay on people's couches or if you arrange your own talks, like, we can stretch that budget. So I'm like, okay, whatever. Like in the room, I pulled out my contact list. I'm like, these are the people that I think that we should pitch. And it was parenting writers I knew across the country. And what was great about that moment was I started talking to the publicist, and she pulled out her spreadsheet. And I know I've talked to a lot of authors, and their publicist won't even tell them who they're pitching. But Public Affairs is amazing. I loved working with them. They were super, super supportive. And maybe because they're a smaller imprint in a big house, they had a little bit more bandwidth. Or maybe it was just because I was bringing a lot to the table. And the publicist and I spent an hour just going through contacts, who she knew, who I knew, who we were going to pitch. The marketing guy left the room, my editor left the room, my agent left the room. So we were just like brainstorming. And I think that really set the stage for this collaboration where I would reach out to people I knew. My dad actually is retired. He helped me pitch speaking engagements. So he landed a couple of speaking engagements for me. I looked at my comp authors and sort of where they had spoken and just pitched there. And once we started getting responses that were positive, I went back to the publicist. I'm like, oh, I have a gig in Milwaukee. She's like, oh, I'll put a book talk together there. And I have something in Chicago with a corporation. She said, oh, we'll call a bookstore in Chicago. So it was very iterative. And I think once they saw that I was getting traction in the, January, February, leading up to this book launch in April, they started investing more in me too. And at one point in the process, my agent said, the great thing about you as an author is you're providing the energy for this whole team, because their whole life is pitching, right? They're all just throwing spaghetti at the wall, right? Trying to get attention in a very crowded marketplace when all anyone wants to write about is politics and division, right? And so it's hard to get books publicity, but I was giving them this positive energy and generating leads. So once I started getting little bits of leads, then the publicist was more willing to do book events. And, I get one talk in New York and she had like 3 different book events in New York. So, so that was really amazing. In the end, I did 26 different stops on my book tour. So I stretched that budget, and I did stay with friends. And in the end, Hachette actually paid for all of the expenses because it had been such a successful experience. But it was really very iterative. Like I brought a lot to the table, and then everything that I was able to generate, I think, encouraged them to invest more in me too.
Did you hire the publicist, or did the publisher hire the publicist?
So she was an in-house publicist who, and another great thing, it was my team there. Benjamin Adams was the editor, and he had 2 young kids, and the publicist had a little boy. I actually spoke at her preschool, the preschool in New York she was trying to get her son into. So I'm like, whatever I can do to help your son get into that preschool, I will. I'm like, I am team publicist. And I hired an intern who was taking a gap year between high school and college, the son of a friend of mine, paid him $15 an hour. And he researched my comp authors, where they had spoken, and he sent out all those pitch emails. So I think we probably sent out like 400 pitch emails to have me as a speaker to get that, 20 or 26 book talk, stop book talk. And he also pitched local media. So whenever I had an event in a city, he would pitch the local radio and local TV. And from that, I had just, like a half dozen, maybe 10 local TV spots. But that is so powerful because the national media sees it and they're like, oh, she can hold a conversation for 4 minutes. Maybe we can have her on national media too. So it's all so iterative. I also often give the analogy, you as the author with a debut, like you're running with a kite on the beach. If you've ever flown a kite in like not very much wind, you are running with that kite and you are providing the wind to get that kite up in the air. And you just have to keep running because you're hoping eventually there's going to be this natural lift of breeze that lifts it up. But if you're not running when that breeze comes along, the kite's not going to fly. And for me, that breeze was in July of my debut of my launch year. I was on Morning Edition on NPR, and the book sold out on Amazon. But if I hadn't had 26 stops on my book tour, if I hadn't had multiple media hits, the NPR producer would have been like, I don't think she's really a big deal. We shouldn't have her on Morning Edition. Right. So because I kept the momentum going from April, May, and June, they were willing to put me on Morning Edition in July. And I think that's so important for all of us because it's, as we started off speaking, right? It's so easy to get discouraged. It's so discouraging. Like I've talked to so many people the week after launch week, they're like, yeah, it feels anticlimactic. Like I wasn't on the New York Times bestseller list. So what else am I supposed to hope for right now? Right. And so if you can provide that energy, then you can generate your own opportunities.
I love that so much, Catherine, that how you advocated for yourself and you built a team around you, right? You built a team around you you know, and the success is ecological and the energy is ecological, and that you really offered that, rather than saying like, I love that so much, because it's like what we talk about here about building a bridge, is that horizontal loyalty, you know, that we are all relying on each other. It's not like you give me the check, I do this, I do that. It's not transactional, right? It's more relational.
Yeah, I love that.
So you have a background in journalism, which some of the people in the call do as well, but a lot of us don't. So what is your best advice for us pitching? What do we have to offer to put us ahead of a staff writer in a place where we want our work seen?
Yeah, so it's so interesting that you pose that question, because I also feel like I have trouble pitching. Like, I've been doing this for 25 years. Pitching is so hard. It's so depressing. It's just rejection after rejection. And in some ways, you're not really competing with that staff writer so much as the other freelancers pitching, because they're looking for new ideas. And I always say, when you're pitching, you need to answer 3 questions for that editor, right? Why you? Why are you the person to write this story? Your voice, your particular access to a source, your, you know, unique expertise. Why now? Because they are news publications and they need to know why this week, why today, why this hour, right? And that urgency helps them say yes. And why this audience? So what work have I done to understand this publication, who they are speaking to, and why my message or my story or my idea is a fit for that audience? And you have to remember, editors are looking to reduce their risk. Whenever they assign to a new person they haven't written with, it is a risk that that person's going to flake out or turn in something bad, and they're going to waste that money and they'll have a hole in their publication. So whatever you can do to reduce that risk, if it's a warm introduction from someone who knows that editor, is 100% the best way. The emails that get answered are the ones that say, freelance pitch, John Berger suggested I write to you. Right. So whenever I'm pitching a new editor, I look through LinkedIn, I look through Facebook, who do I know who knows that person, and ask them to give me an introduction. Or can I drop your name? Because those are the emails that are going to get answered. And then just do not take rejection personally. I am right now with my O'Brien project, I'm pitching again, honestly, for the first time since 2016, because I was, writing the book for 2 years and then I was on tour. It's so hard. It's, you need a team around you like this group, to get through that. But they're looking for fresh voices and they're looking for new perspectives. So I think as long as you really understand how you fit in with that publication. And I would also say, some of the other things that really help, seasonality is good to look at, editors, instead of a news hook, if you're looking at like a holiday, hook it on a holiday. That's always good.
And
anniversary
pitching for a holiday, you need to pitch between 2 and 6 months in advance of that holiday. You cannot pitch for Father's Day, your great essay about your dad, the week before Father's Day. You got to start pitching Father's Day in February.
And you can also write something and then wait to pitch it until there's a news hook. So when I had written a couple pieces, and like, sadly in this country, periodically there's an incident of a kid getting pulled out of their seat by a school resource officer, right? That goes viral. And I could pitch around those kinds of incidents. So that's the other thing to think about, is like, if you have an evergreen piece and this is the kind of thing that sometimes comes up in the news, wait to pitch until that moment that it's viral.
So we had a couple of people ask in the chat a really good question, which is, you're running with the kite. When do you quit? When do you accept this book is just not going to take off the way I want it to?
I mean, I think that's a really hard question because it's so personal and it depends on your own resources, so what can you really afford to do? I had planned to spend the 6 months before and the 6 months after exclusively focus on the book. So I had saved up enough money and budgeted that would be accessible to me. But I will say, my colleague, Julie Lythcott-Haims, who was one of my comp authors, and she blurred my book, she's incredibly generous. She wrote actually this book, which is amazing, Your Turn, How to Be an Adult, after her first New York Times bestseller, How to Raise an Adult. Her book came out, I think originally it came out in May or April. And she just ran with that kite. She flew anywhere that would have her speak. She did so much travel on her own dime. And her book hit the New York Times bestseller list in October. So she was running for at least 6 months, right? And then she was a New York Times bestseller, and she's, got her memoir published that she actually had written beforehand, but didn't have a platform. So she hadn't been able to get it published. But then once her first book took off, she was able to get that memoir published as well. So, I mean, how many books do each of us have in us?
And I also want to add too that one of the reasons to stop working on one book is you've got another book that's taking up your attention, and you need to take your focus off your previous book and put it on your next book. And that's one of the great reasons to keep writing, even while you're submitting, even while you're querying, even while you're pitching. Judith's got a really specific question for you. Which of these books do you recommend for childlike behavior in adults? Have you noticed that the market has veered in a particular direction, or the audience has shifted?
That's an interesting question. You mean, are books now being written more for millennials who are struggling? I'm not sure I understand.
I think she's wondering about the specific books that you mentioned.
Oh.
You were talking about your comp author and friends books, and your book. For childlike behavior in adults.
I mean, I honestly feel like a lot of us struggle right now. And I think there's so many great books out there for dealing with mental health and bad habits and healthier behavior. So in terms of dealing with other people, it's hard. But I would say, anything Buddhist, like Tara Brach is amazing. And I really think Julie Lythcott-Haims is amazing. I love this book, Your Turn. It has all these stories of really diverse people and neurodiverse people who are in here, sort of all finding your own way. And I think that it's honestly, for me, it's just been about appreciating that we're all dealing with something. And if I can offer compassion and grace to the person that I'm with, right, instead of interpreting their behavior as, difficult for me, that often will bring out the best in them. I will tell you, a book my husband loves is Leadership and Self-Deception. And it's like a leadership book, but the basic tenet is that we all know in an interaction what the other person wants from us, right? Whether it's your spouse or a child or someone on the street, you sort of instinctively know what that person wants. And the only question is, are you going to give it to them or withhold it? Whether it's like approval, forgiveness, cooperation, or whatever. Anyway, so that's another suggestion.
That's fantastic. When we come back from breakout rooms, you are going to tell us one last amazing thing, which is how do we study the resumes of people whose careers we want and then take steps to get those careers for ourselves. So welcome back from breakout rooms, everybody. We are so glad to have you back. We want to give Catherine one more thing, which is her top tip for us. So Catherine, you talk about study the resumes of the people whose careers you want. What does it look like to do that? And how do we go about copying the careers of people we want?
Well, I already told you how to make an article go viral. Just kidding. So, it's aspirational for sure. But I think it's helpful to look at, who are the authors that I would like to be like? What fellowships did they have? What writing residencies were they part of? What communities have given them support? And a lot of them we all know, like whether it's some of the really prestigious residencies or some of the smaller ones. So, and then also, what publications have they been in? Because sometimes it feels like there's all this pressure to like get out there and do lots of publishing and pitching all over the place and be everywhere. But if instead you can identify, okay, this person has like a New York Times column and they went to Yaddo and they have a fellowship with X, like you may not have exactly those prestigious of things, but you can be in that lane. So I went to the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts residency, which is not Yaddo, but it was amazing. And in some ways, I think was more grounded and really personal. And it helped me feel like I was an artist, like as opposed to just a person who stitches together words on a page. So, and then the other thing I did, which I described a little bit before, is I had literally had my researcher look at everywhere that the authors that I felt were my comp titles had spoken, where they had published, which journalists covered their book. And we wrote to all of those people. So we pitched all of those people, and we literally said, because you had Jessica Leahy come speak at your school, we thought you'd be interested in Catherine's book. And it's because it's a very similar book. And that's actually how I got on NPR, is because the reporter who interviewed me for NPR had also interviewed Nadine Burke Harris about The Deepest Well. So that also is really helpful, because it draws the line with other people who are in this ecosystem of, you know, the things that happen when a book comes out, and all of those are opportunities for you potentially.
That is brilliant. And you know what I love about that, Catherine? You don't have to be connected. You don't have to even have an agent if you are publishing with a smaller press. You don't have to have a PR person. You can hire an intern or your college student and say, I need you to look at these 10 books, spend 5 hours on Google, and make me an Excel sheet of every single place these writers have spoken, and start digging up their contact info. And Jasmine asks specifically, how do you hire someone to help with the research? And we can talk more in depth about that another time. But that's something where like Bennington University, Bennington College has an internship program where a lot of the students do remote internships. So does Kalamazoo College. And if you search for internship job placement college, you can probably find someone who wants to come work for 6 weeks and is not going to charge you as much as somebody who does full-time stuff. You'll have to handhold them. And Catherine points out really well, do a test project before you commit. But that can be a really great source. And yeah, Abby, we will absolutely talk about research skills and everything too. Catherine, do you have anything you want to leave us with before we wrap up today's meeting and tell everybody what we're doing next time?
Yeah, I just really was glad to be here. It's inspiring to me to connect with y'all, and you know, you're part of my community. I would love to see people at the Center for Independent Journalists webinar on December 3rd. If you'd like to go to thecij.com to sign up for free, you can find me on social media, Catherine Reynolds Lewis or Catherine Lewis, depending on the platform. And I just love to stay in touch and connect with everyone in a continuing way.
Fantastic. And we will be linking to your upcoming thing, your upcoming webinar on the 3rd of December.
Oh, that would be great. Thank you so much.
We'll link to that, and we'll also link to the Center for Independent Journalism. We also want everybody to know that our next meeting is going to be, how do you use the platform you already have? How do you present what you already have, regardless of the size of your platform? How do you present that in a way that looks positive, that shows who you are, that shows what you do? And the reason that we're talking about this is I was helping an author who said, I got turned down for my novel because I had no platform. And I looked at her website and I was like, I have no clue who you are, what you do, or what you write about. So we're going to talk about how do we capitalize on the platform we already have. Ashley, anything else you want to add?
This was wonderful. Catherine, thank you so much for joining us. My brain is really buzzing right now with different ideas and different ways to look at things. So it was such a gift. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me here.
Feel free to unmute yourselves for a lovely goodbye. Thank you all so much for taking the time to be here tonight.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.